This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, Jeb Bush drops out and Marco Rubio desperately is battling to stay in the GOP race for the presidential nomination.
If he builds the wall the way he built Trump Towers, he'll be using illegal immigrant labor to do it.
Legislators narrowly defeat a fracking bill in Tallahassee. The State House approves $250 million in public money for Enterprise Florida. Some are calling it corporate welfare. And there's a bipartisan push to expand the Florida cabinet. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are John Romano is a columnist at the Tampa Bay Times. Bill Bunting is Pasco County Republican State Committee man. Margie Manning is a finance editor at the Tampa Bay Business Journal. And Barry Edwards is a Democratic strategist and a radio commentator. Well, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming. Well, former Governor Jeb Bush dropped out of the presidential race last week after a poor showing in the South Carolina Republican primary. That leaves Marco Rubio, the last big-name Florida politician in the race.
Or the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streamed.
Super Tuesday is just a few days from now. At the Republican debate on Thursday night, Rubio squared off with Donald Trump in several heated exchanges.
He hired workers from Poland, and he had to pay $1 million or so in a judgment.
That's wrong.
That's a fact.
Totally wrong.
Well, people can look it up. I'm sure people are Googling it right now. Look it up.
Cruz.
Trump Polish workers. You'll see $1 million for hiring illegal workers on one of his projects. Yeah, he did. If he builds the wall the way he built Trump Towers, he'll be using illegal immigrant labor to do it. The second...
So cute. Such a cute soundbite.
But no, it's not a soundbite. It's a fact.
Yeah,
again, go online and Google it. Donald Trump, Polish workers. You'll see it. The second thing about the trade war, I don't understand, because your ties and the clothes you make is made in Mexico and in China. So you're going to be starting a trade war against your own ties and your own suits. That's right. All right.
You know what?
Why don't you make them in America?
Polls in the 11 states that are voting this Tuesday have Rubio winning none of those states. So, Bill, Rubio really went after Trump on Thursday night. He had to do that because his poll numbers are not good in any of those 11 Super Tuesday states. Can Rubio get through Super Tuesday and stay in till Florida on March 15th?
I believe Republicans are hoping he can get through. It's going to be difficult. There's no question about it. And I think one of the problems is that his advisors don't let Rubio be Rubio. When Rubio was with me going around the state and going to the gun shows and meeting people, people love him. And he knew how to reach out to the public. And I think that's what's missing there, Rob.
What about his experience? Because you hear some Republicans saying he doesn't have enough experience. They criticized Obama for not having enough experience. Now they don't want to elect somebody who is kind of a mirror image of Obama with that kind of experience, right?
Well, they can criticize the experience, but they also have to realize he's got conservative values opposite of Obama. Obama has a liberal agenda that has pretty much wants to tear up the Constitution and the Second Amendment. That's not Rubio's stand.
Mm-hmm. John, I want to ask you about Chris Christie's endorsement of Donald Trump on Friday. What do you make of that? I mean, does that change, do you think, significantly the dynamics here?
I don't think so. I don't think endorsements are driving this election at all. I don't even think ideology is driving this election. I think people have a visceral reaction to Donald Trump right now, and that's where it's going. I thought Rubio did a terrific job of attacking him at the debate. I think he made some very good points on the fact that there is very little substance to what Trump is saying, but I don't think people are listening to that. I think it has to do with something in their gut that says we don't trust Washington anymore, and we want this guy who's a businessman, much like we saw with Florida and Rick Scott in 2010.
Rubio kept hitting Trump over the issue of hiring people from other countries to work at his private club in Palm Beach. And the New York Times came out and did a story and found people in Palm Beach that wanted those jobs, U.S. residents that wanted those jobs, but weren't able to get them from Donald Trump.
I just don't think that matters to people who are going to be walking into the voting booths. And I'm curious what you think on Super Tuesday, what does Rubio have to do? Does he have to take at least one or two of those? Can he walk out of there and say, I'm 0 for 16 now at this point?
Well, I think he has to either that, John, or very, very strong second to hold up where he is, because I think that the money that was flowing to Jeb is going to be flowing to Rubio. And if he can sustain that and have the cash, then he's good to come in here for March 15th, which he's got some work to do, and I hope he gets rid of his advisors for a while and just let Rubio be Rubio.
Barry, what do you think about Rubio being able to last more than a couple more weeks?
I think he can. As a Hillary Clinton supporter, he's the one I fear the most. And I think he had to do three things at the debate. He had to, number one, sell his number one asset, which, for good or worse, is his electability. And I think he did that. He looked presidential, and he looked like a leader. He was able to take on Trump. So I think he accomplished what he needed to do at the debate. But as far as going forward, this whole idea that we have lanes in the presidential, if we look at the exit polling, Donald Trump beat Ted Cruz amongst the evangelicals. So this idea that there's these lanes is really something that we in the press and the media want, but it really doesn't exist. Dick Wertham, the greatest presidential pollster of all time, in 1984 said people really in America were closer to Mondale on almost every issue, but they voted for Reagan because they liked him and they trusted him. So for Rubio, what he has to do is get through, which are proportional. These are proportional delegate states on Super Tuesday. On the 15th, that's when it really begins tough, because Florida's a winner-take-all, Ohio's a winner-take-all, several other states are winner-take-all. So he has to come in strong second, maybe win, keep raising money, but then he has to close the deal on the 15th or it's too late.
Are you sure Texas isn't a winner-take-all state in this coming up election?
Texas is proportional with congressional districts. It's got one of those complicated systems. I think you have to get 20%. I'm not really familiar with it, but I don't think it's a winner-take-all.
Margie, what did you think of the debate on Thursday night, where there was all that name-calling, and it seemed like the moderators had somewhat lost control, and it got very personal between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump and Marco Rubio. It was one of the most unusual debates I think I've ever watched.
And it's been one of the most unusual political seasons, certainly. I think that people, as John said, I think people are responding more out of emotions than ideology. But there is, I want to go back to something Bill said, and that's the money. And I really think that Rubio's best chances hinge on picking up that money, that huge campaign pot that Jeb Bush has accumulated. And he's starting to get that. Yeah. Additionally, he's starting to get a little bit of interest from the well-funded activists associated with the Koch brothers. And I think that's going to be kind of the jet fuel that carries him along underneath the emotions that are on the surface.
But people point to Jeb Bush's campaign and the tremendous amount of money that he spent in places like Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina, and got very little despite spending all that money.
Well, that's his personality. I think it was the problem there. Rubio doesn't have that personality problem, at least not the same kind of issue that Jeb Bush had.
Because Rubio does better connecting with voters, you think?
I believe that's the case.
That's
yes.
what you think, Bill. Yeah.
Right. You don't have to have the most money. You have to have enough money. And Rubio is about the future. Jeb's problem was his whole campaign was based on what he did as governor 15 years ago. Campaigns are always about the future. They're always aspirational. He's the one that's going to connect. And now that you winnow down, instead of having 17 people on the stage, there's 5, he's getting a third of the time versus Trump. And something that they should have done before, everybody was attacking each other rather than Trump because they thought he would self-destruct. Well, now that they know he isn't, obviously in this last debate, Cruz and Rubio took it to Trump. And I don't know how long he can handle having everybody take it to Trump.
John, I want to ask you about a Quinnipiac poll that was out this week. They polled Florida likely voters. They looked at the Democratic race and the Republican race. On the Democratic race, Hillary Clinton easily beat Bernie Sanders. On the Republican side, Donald Trump got 44% of the vote, and Marco Rubio, the favorite son, who was supposed to sweep Florida, either he or Jeb Bush were supposed to take it, he only got 28%. How could Rubio, I mean, if you believe that poll, and if so, why do you think Rubio's in such trouble here in the state of Florida? And then I'll go to Bill.
I think those numbers are going to shift over the next week or two once people get used to the idea that Jeb Bush is out of the field now, and I think there will be more support coalescing behind Marco Rubio. But I still think he has this basic problem of people not seeing him as or seeing him as part of the establishment still, even though he's trying to, paint himself as the new generation and the next generation of what the Republican Party is, he's still very much aligned with Republican Party principles, and Donald Trump is not. And I don't think people are going to be voting along with ideological lines this time.
Bill, do you believe that Quinnipiac poll?
No, I don't. But Quinnipiac, they've been wrong before, but they're pretty good. They do a good job. But one of the things that I neglected to say before, we're a third-party register in Pasco County, which means we can turn in voter applications and register them. My car was running back and forth for 9 days to the supervisor of elections office. The people that were coming in weren't politically correct, believe me. And they were all no party affiliation. And the majority, I would say 95%, are going to vote for Trump. And that's the part I'm worried about. And that's happening probably not just in Pasco County, where I actually hand-delivered them to the supervisor. It's probably happening all over the country. And Republicans aren't going to have a voice as strong as they thought they might.
Bill, you're known as, I think, kind of an important part of the Republican Party in Florida, and especially in this part of Florida. Do you think that people who've been with the party a long time, establishment people, can embrace Donald Trump if he's the eventual nominee?
I think they don't have any choice. I said after Obama being in the White House it'll be 8 years then, 7 years now, I don't think they have a choice but to embrace him. What are the choices?
So I think Bloomberg is a likely choice.
I don't think Bloomberg could get elected in this country on this gun issue come hell or high water.
So, Barry, what do you think? I mean,
I think that at the end of the day, all the data is conclusive. Republicans vote for Republicans, Democrats vote for Democrats. We all say we're not going to. We all hold our nose. The Bernie Sanders people that say they're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton, you're going to get 1 or 2% drop off, which is the margin. And so the Republicans will embrace Trump, the Democrats will embrace Hillary, even the progressives. As far as Bloomberg, say he gets 20% in the state. It's a plurality. He still doesn't win. Bloomberg is the ideal, is the dream for the Republican Party, because he pulls away Democratic votes. He's not going to win a state. And if he wins a state, say he wins a state and it comes away from the Democrat, that throws it to the House of Representatives. And if you don't get the 270 votes in the Electoral College, it's the current House that sits that selects the next president. Each state gets 1 vote, each congressman gets 1, and then whoever's the majority gets that vote. So, and just so you know,
so it's a Republican-controlled Congress.
Republican-controlled Congress, and they have to vote for the top 3 vote getters. So it's not like if they throw it into the House, they can pick Paul Ryan. It has to be one of the top 3 Electoral College vote getters. So it'd have to be Trump, Hillary, or Bloomberg. Republicans are not going to pick a guy who wants to take away your gun like Michael Bloomberg. So there just is no data, and that's why he's hesitating to get in, because there's no scenario, there's no model that shows that he can get 270.
All right. Well, a bill that would study and create regulations for fracking in the Sunshine State is on life support after a Florida Senate committee rejected it this week. The Senate Appropriations Committee narrowly voted against the bill. It was kept alive, though, on a procedural vote. The House already passed a similar bill that requires the State Department of Environmental Protection to study the effects of fracking and develop new regulations. Fracking uses pressurized water and secret chemicals to force oil and gas up from underground. Supporters say the bill would create a process by which the state could regulate fracking if it is ultimately approved. Opponents, though, fear that Florida's groundwater would be contaminated, and they didn't like the fact that the bill stops local governments from banning fracking in their local communities. Many communities in Florida have already banned fracking. So, John, is fracking dead now in the state of Florida?
I don't think it's quite dead yet. It was a very close vote in committee yesterday. Senator Richter has talked about bringing it back next week, making some changes to it. My question is, who is asking for fracking in this state? I mean, other than oil companies, who is saying, hey, let's take a state where we're very dependent on tourist dollars and we get all our drinking water from underground aquifers and we have these sinkhole problems, and let's drill giant holes and fill them up with toxic chemicals. Who thinks that's a good idea other than these oil companies that are basically paying our legislature to carry their water for them?
Well, Margie, what about that? Are the oil and gas industry, is the oil and gas industry rather, pretty excited about the possibility of fracking here in Florida, and are they exerting a lot of pressure in Tallahassee?
I believe there are a couple of projects that are either underway or being talked about being underway. It's interesting to me that there is so much industry support for and legislative understanding of this new technology, whereas we're not seeing that in something that's natural to Florida, and that's solar energy. The contrast between the two is just amazing to me.
Okay. Well, it's one of Governor Rick Scott's top priorities this year, $250 million in funding for Enterprise Florida. The House approved the concept this week, but did not specify exactly how much money will be set aside. The money would be paid to companies that move operations here from out of state and create jobs. Some call the fund corporate welfare, and Republicans and Democrats are split on the idea. Even though the governor wants funding for Enterprise Florida, his fellow Republican House Appropriations Chair Richard Corcoran of Land O'Lakes voted against it. So, Margie, what are the arguments that it's corporate welfare? What are the arguments that it's actually good for the state of Florida?
Well, the argument that it's good for the state of Florida is that it has, with these incentives, many companies have expanded in Florida. They've relocated to Florida and brought lots of jobs, high-paying jobs with them, because these incentives are tied to higher-wage jobs. However, I will tell you that I talk to lots of businesses that have expanded or relocated here, and they tell me that the incentives are just one piece of what they consider. What's really important is the state's education system, its ability to put out good, high-quality talent, a good workforce, and those things aren't getting the same kind of attention right now.
I imagine our transportation system and other infrastructure issues are important to them, too.
Exactly. Those are all key issues.
Yeah. Barry, what do you think about Enterprise Florida? Is this should we spend $250 million on it?
I don't think so, and I echo what Margie said. I think she's absolutely right. When you ask a company why they come here, taxes are not the primary reason. The primary reason they don't come here is because our K-12 education is horrible, our universities are horrible, and they're horrible because they're not funded well, and we should spend a lot more money on them and money wisely. But our infrastructure is, I think the Department of Transportation says $50 billion underfunded. So if we spent the $250 million on infrastructure, we would get a lot higher economic multiplier. But the Democrats in the legislature did extract some better concessions this year because they knew it was going to pass. There's a clawback provision if you don't provide the jobs. There's some more oversight and some more transparency.
You got to pay the money back if you don't provide the jobs?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the Democrats were able to force in the House those things being added to the bill.
Bill, I was really interested that Richard Corcoran, the incoming House Speaker, voted against it. It's one of the governor's top priorities. What does that say about the relationship between the governor and the incoming Speaker?
Well, the incoming Speaker's got a mind of his own. You know, Rich and I are personal friends. He's from Land O'Lakes. I know him a long time, and he's Marco Rubio's former chief of staff and endorsed Bush, by the way. And I just think Rich is going to be Rich. He's going to come out and he's going to say what he believes in. I think he's one of the most hardworking individuals I know up there in the House, and I think he's right. Personally, though, I think the governor keeps getting a bad rap every time he wants to bring jobs into the state, no matter what he does.
Should we spend $250 million on Enterprise Florida?
I can see $250 million coming down. I think we got it in the budget. I think it's appropriate, and I think he should go forward with it.
Yeah, John, what do you think about that? Because there are groups out there saying that it is corporate welfare, and we have other human needs that are not being met in the state.
It is clearly corporate welfare, and the problem goes beyond just that $250 million. There's also the $1 billion he's talking about in tax cuts that is mostly for corporations, and that goes back to exactly what you're saying, that we have some infrastructure problems. We have a lot of problems. We have our per pupil spending for education is among the worst in the nation. We've got prisons. We've got mental hospitals that are underfunded and are dangerous. We've got kids, needy kids, being kicked out of the Children's Medical Services program. There are all sorts of things we could be spending money on instead of giving more corporate welfare through tax cuts and through incentives to businesses.
All right. Well, there are a couple of proposals in Tallahassee to expand the number of elected cabinet members. Back in 2008, Floridians voted to shrink the cabinet down to 4 members, but that could be changing. The Senate Rules Committee voted this week for a proposed constitutional amendment that would make the office of Secretary of State an elected position and a cabinet post, not an appointee of the governor as it is now. It's not getting far in the House, though, so it may be dead for this year. Meanwhile, another Senate bill would make the Commissioner of Education an elected position. With the smaller cabinet, the power of the governor's office has grown, and some want to check that power. Ultimately, any decision to add elected cabinet officials must be approved by the voters of the state of Florida. So, Barry, you're holding that up. We used to have 7 elected officials now in the cabinet. Now we're down to 4. Is it a good idea, do you think, to expand the number of elected cabinet members?
Absolutely. You're looking on the screen here is the golden age of Florida politics, when the cabinet was all held by Democrats under Governor Graham, and hopefully this will be the way in the future.
So there are no elected Democrats on the cabinet now. Are you saying that by expanding the cabinet, you'd elect some Democrats?
I think we'd be given more opportunities, because some of the positions that we eliminated, and remember, this all happened in 1998 under a Democrat-controlled Constitutional Revision Commission led by Dexter Douglas. They voted to eliminate the Education Commissioner and combine the Comptroller and Treasurer into the CFO and eliminate the Secretary of State. And why they did that was because in the South, a lot of the states had limited power for the governor after the Civil War. We actually had set up the cabinet system before the Civil War in 1838. But
the cabinet is a check on the power of the governor.
Correct. It's a divided executive.
Right.
And we did that because we liked Governor Graham. Now, we don't like, a lot of people don't like the governor, so they want to take away his power. So you really ought to look at things in the long term. But one of the positions, the Education Commissioner, would be an advocate for education. You say, well, what difference does it make if it's elected or appointed? Because in the cabinet, the positions are, they control the Board of Administration, which controls the $100+ billion state pension fund and where that's invested. They control the land use, Board of Land Use, which buys and sells state property, the Board of Clemency, things like that. So they sit together as a collegial executive and the cabinet, so they can barter off their votes to get support for other things. So you'd have the Education Commissioner would be an advocate there. We used to have an elected Insurance Commissioner. Now it's appointed by the CFO and the governor. That would be a better check for Floridians for their insurance rates. The Comptroller was elected to oversee banks. So I think expanding it back to the way it was would be a good idea.
John, let me go to you. Do you think we need more elected members of the cabinet, or is 4 the right number?
I understand the concept of why we went the other direction, because Florida was being run more like a board of directors instead of having a CEO run a company, and it was harder to get some things done. The problem is, taking away the Education Commissioner, the idea at the time was that it would make it a less political position if it was an appointed position. It's actually turned out to be more political, because what has happened is the governor sets up his own Board of Education with people that are going to support his goals for education. And so the Education Commissioner basically becomes a puppet for the governor and the Board of Education. Voters no longer, parents of school children, no longer have a say in what's going on in the Board of Education, because that person's almost untouchable now that they're an appointed commission. And it's like the Board of Education and the governor have become a buffer between that department and parents of school children. That's a problem, and I think we need to fix that.
All right. Well, Bill, do you think that we need to have more elected members of the cabinet?
No, I think 4 is right, and I'm going to disagree with John here, because the voters have a right to vote the governor out, or vote the ag commissioner out, or anybody else that isn't doing their job, and that's how it should be done. If they're not responsible for what you believe in, don't vote for them.
All right. Margie, what do you think about this?
I think it comes down to, have we seen an improvement in our school performance under this system? From what I'm hearing, the schools have not improved significantly.
Okay.
2 quick final points. One, next year the governor appoints the Constitutional Revision Commission with the Speaker and the Senate President, the Attorney General, and the Chief Justice, so they can put stuff directly on the ballot like they did. And the Secretary of State is the one who oversees elections. So we need.
Are they likely to put these issues on the ballot?
No.
Okay. Before we go, what other news stories should we be paying attention to? Bill, let's start with you. Your other big story.
Well, I'm happy to say that we're doing our Reagan Day dinner in April in Pasco County, which is always a huge success. But more importantly, this year, we have John's favorite governor coming in. We have Governor Rick Scott coming in to be our keynote speaker, and so we can do it on a Tuesday night now. We don't have to wait for a weekend when we have the governor.
Bill, there's some suggestion that Rick Scott might be considered to be a VP candidate in this year. Do you think he's a good candidate for VP?
I don't think he's going to be considered. They got to have somebody that has inner workings of the White House. They really do, and I think Trump, if he was a nominee, pretty much alluded to that. He's got to have somebody like a Kasich in there to get things done.
All right. Barry, your other big story?
I think that this week we saw that there is bipartisanship alive in Tallahassee. Byron Cumbie and Darrell Rousone got the first gun bill passed. There was a restriction on gun rights in Florida history. There was a little 6-month period where they had, you could do open carry because of a glitch when they passed the concealed weapons permit back in '88. But this is the first restriction, and it was done by unanimous vote. There is common sense if you don't question people's motivations.
All right, Margie, your other big story?
University of South Florida Board of Trustees next Thursday, are going to vote on a new contract for the USF president, Judy Genshaft. It raises her pay potentially by as much as 19%, though a lot of it is sort of at-risk compensation. It's based on performance. But what's really significant is up till now she's had 5-year contracts. This is a 1-year contract. Raises questions about the future of USF leadership.
And she's certainly one of the longest-serving presidents at USF.
She's been there since 2000,
right.
And she's 68 years old.
All right. And
a salary?
The new salary will be potentially above $800,000.
All right. John, your other big story.
The Executive Clemency Board meets on Tuesday. This is a group made up of the governor and the 3 cabinet members to review prisoners' cases. They meet 4 times a year. It's been a wonderful way for the cabinet, the governor, to show mercy in cases of injustice and extenuating circumstances. When Jeb Bush was governor, he granted clemency 22 times in 8 years. Charlie Crist 13 times in 4 years. Rick Scott has been doing it for 5 years. There have been 3 cases of clemency granted since then.
He's been pretty tough.
Pretty tough.
All right. Well, thank you all for a great show, and thank you for watching Florida This Week. We want to hear from you. You can write us at ftw@wedu.org or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. You can watch the show online on the wedu.org website beginning Monday morning. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a great weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.